Hello everyone, Marco Montemagno here, Digital Domination Summit 2013, and the next guest is Peter Arvai, co-founder and CEO of Prezi. Hi Peter, how are you going?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Everything phenomenal. We were talking a little bit before to start this interview, and I say to Peter, look, you're from Sweden, because often looks like you're from Hungary, because we will see Prezi started from Hungary and it's got a branch in Hungary, but you're originally from Sweden, right?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Sweden, but my parents are actually from Hungary, so I actually speak Hungarian myself. And because my two co-founders are from Hungary as well, we started this company in Budapest. So back in
Right.
2008, I left Sweden, moved to Hungary, and yeah, have a company nowadays of 130 people,
Wow.
but 80% of the company is actually based in Hungary,
80%.
representing 22 different countries, but still.
Yeah, amazing. By the way, if I'm not wrong, I just try to remember. I think Ustream is from Budapest, or they launched from you.
Ustream and Logmein as well. A lot of people don't know this, but yeah, Hungary has actually quite a fertile ground for startups to go from.
Yeah, and as I told you before, when I know that someone is from Sweden, I always think that Sweden is a country that born talents, you know. And I read this book from Taleb a few years ago. The Black Swan, I think, was the title, and it was talking about how suddenly someone or something can come out from the middle of nowhere and create amazing things. And as I told you, I was a table tennis player, and Sweden got some of the best table tennis players in the history from
Yeah,
nothing. They came out and wow, they were amazing. So also
right.
Prezi, you know, you coming from Sweden, and for me, you have this DNA, Peter. So this is the
Well, it's not just in terms of sports, but in terms of startups, and a lot of global brands are actually coming from Sweden. So
right.
everything from Volvo to Ericsson to ABB, H&M,
IKEA.
IKEA.
Yeah, yeah, IKEA.
Yeah, IKEA is the one that most people know about. These are global brands that are being built from a tiny country of Northern Europe. So per capita, there's a lot of global companies being built from Sweden. And Skype, by the way, is another example. But then you have Spotify
Right.
and many others.
I would like to say yes. Also from Italy, we have nothing, still nothing, but we'll arrive. Italians, you know, arrive later, but I know that my fellow Italian friends will come sooner or later with a great startup. So, Peter, if you came to me, okay, I think was 2008, 2009 that Prezi start more or less, right? And if in that year you would come to me and imagine that I was an investor, and you come to me and say, all right, Marco, we want to do a presentation platform that will attack PowerPoint and we change the way of presentation, I would say, Peter, change, you know, do another job, because it looks a little bit too difficult. The market is too difficult, competitor is too strong, everyone use only PowerPoint and so on. And but you did it, and now Prezi has got, I think, 20 million users, unbelievable number.
23.
Yeah, all right, 23. So the big question is how you did it, because I really can't believe how you could do that also in a very short period of time.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of at least two things. One, a very unique approach at looking at how ideas can be organized. In many ways, Prezi, shares some qualities with whiteboards, what you see behind me here, and also slides. Because Prezi enables you to connect your topics, and if you zoom out, you kind of see the big picture of how the ideas are related, but you can zoom in and focus on a particular topic. And when you do this combination of things, you kind of create a visual journey that's much more engaging and fun for users than just the ordinary slideshow. So I think that unique approach really captivates people. And if you look at the users that we have today, Prezi has been spreading word by mouth. So
Okay.
we have almost zero spending on marketing. And it's essentially the experience of our product that enables us to spread on a global level. But having said that, we had good timing as well, because the internet was just mature enough to start doing more advanced services in the browser directly.
Right.
Had we started Prezi maybe 10 years ago, this wouldn't have been the case. So there was this very particular point in time when advanced services, something that could really compete with the Office package, could be put into a browser, and that we were lucky, very lucky with that.
Okay. Well, but 23 million is a huge number. So, and you say just a word of mouth created this kind of phenomenal success.
Right. Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. Today we're adding 1.5 million users per month. And again, this is happening through people creating Prezis and showing Prezis to other people. If you like what you see, then you might get interested in doing your own Prezi, and that's how Prezi keeps spreading.
Right. So this is one thing. I'm reading a book called The Contagious that is studying and researching how things go viral, basically. But I also remember an old book, Viral Loop Inside, and so I think one killer feature from Prezi is that is viral by default, because I mean, to use it you have to show to people, and if you show to people you immediately say this is a Prezi presentation. So if you see it, then if you like it you want to use it. So this is very very smart. Right. The other point is that I have to say also, yeah, PowerPoint was very strong, but also people hate PowerPoint. I have to be honest. I mean, I do presentations for 12, 15 years now, and I don't use PowerPoint. I don't remember the last time I used PowerPoint, because it's really, really painful when you use it. People all over the world, we were bombarded, with PowerPoints, bullets, and so it's so far from how a real presentation is. So this is also another point, that you find the pain and you solve the pain by telling a story. So that was very interesting. But also, I think the overview is that you focus on ideas. So instead of selling a software, because a lot of people sell software to do presentations, maybe different from Prezi, but if you focus on software, people say, okay, good, it's a software, I use it if I need it. I think you're going more on this idea economy. I would like to elaborate on that.
Yeah. Well, the motivation for us actually in many ways to build this company is because we believe that the world is changing. This is not controversial. But we also believe that the world is changing in a positive direction. Now, that would be probably more disputed, but it's interesting that when you look at the charts of how the world is changing, almost any number you find on a big picture level, if you zoom out and take a look at several hundred years, everything is pointing in a very positive direction. So we're living longer and healthier, and in fact, even more respectful lives. So with life expectancy, we can of course measure our health, and that most people know that we live longer and have healthier lives. But then, in addition, once you start looking at how people are treating each other, the same numbers keep appearing. Homicide rates in the last 800 years have been continuously going down. So I would recommend you to check out the book by Steven Pinker, for example, a Harvard professor, that describes this very, very well. And essentially the conclusion is that even though we might live with the idea that we're in a terrible world, and there's a lot of conflicts and friction left, I will be the first one to admit that, it seems like we've never lived in such a peaceful and healthy and happy time as today. And the way we, change our behaviors is essentially by people sharing ideas.
Yeah.
So humans are very, very different from, for example, animals. You know this if you've tried to teach a dog various tricks, for example. It takes a lot of time to, just transfer one idea.
Yeah.
But we humans, we have this capacity, incredible capacity, to share a lot of ideas and change our behaviors extremely rapidly. And that's kind of the explanation behind why, our economies are changing so quickly all the time as well. We went from, the agricultural to an industrial, and now we're probably going into what I would call very much an idea economy, where we spend more time just sharing ideas using tools like the internet than we spend time on, growing food or manufacturing objects.
Right.
So because we believe that, idea sharing is becoming such a central part of what we do, and also because we think that they're at the heart of improving the world, we at Prezi, we essentially want to contribute to accelerate that positive trend. So how can we inspire people to share more ideas? How can we make the ideas that people share stick better and make it easier to understand? That's what we're concerned with,
Right.
and that's what, in essence, motivates us.
And also, Peter, in this way, I would say doesn't really matter that, of course, technology matters and softwares that you in the end sell, because the business in the end has to sustain itself, but you will adapt. If this is the vision, you'll just learning what better inspire people will allow you to change technology and adapt technology to go in that direction, right? I guess.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of other, really smart entrepreneurs that have expressed this desire before, that how can you make the technology invisible?
Right.
And make the experience the most important. And for us, the experience that we're dealing with is enabling idea sharing.
Yeah.
So how can we make the technology disappear, but make the idea come front and center?
Yeah. My feeling, Peter, is I would like to have your opinion on this, because it's a chance to talk with you, and I'm always thinking about presentations because I'm forced to think about presentation. So, for instance, I had to do a presentation 10 days ago in a place where the average age was 85 years old, and I had to talk about internet opportunities to people who don't know, not internet, but how to use a computer. So it's difficult to relate, and you try to figure out what's the best way to connect with these people, if it's showing a video or giving an object or so. And when you think about presentation, you really think what's next, what really works, how is the context, and so on. So I was trying to understand what is the right direction of presentations in this moment, because we have a TED format now for presentations, for instance. TED is also investor, I think, in Prezi, and there is a strong connection with Prezi. So which is basically a person giving a talk with showing images or text or videos with whatever software they use. So this is a format. Or I don't know, we have Khan Academy, where there is this guy, on a dark, horrible dashboard explaining things. And this is another format that some people like, some people don't like. So what's do you think the way to go? Because I feel that, this is not connecting with the audience yet. It's still something where there is someone who talks. It's very like television for me, where you talk in front of a camera and that's it. But the audience is a little bit just there listening. What's next? What do you think?
Well, I think, I just want to preface and say, I think a lot of TED Talks actually does a good job with connecting. But let me suggest that actually science can help us to understand the future direction a lot. Nowadays, there's all sorts of really exciting research being done in terms of understanding how our brains work.
Yeah.
And what essentially is becoming clearer is what makes information possible to penetrate our thick skull. And it turns out that, if you package information in certain ways, it's much easier for us to both understand and remember it. So, for example, visual and spatial information leaves a much deeper imprint on our brains than textual. This is very clear. So I'll give you an example of this. If I asked you right now to tell me what are the kitchen appliances that you have, And probably what you're doing right now is imagining yourself in your kitchen, looking around and naming
Right.
the different things. Now, what you're not doing is equally important. You're not creating a list, neither bullet point, neither alphabetized. But the reason why you're not creating a text is because it's just a very, very small portion of your brain that's dedicated for textual understanding. Whereas if you didn't have this visual spatial part of your brain, then you couldn't find your way between your office and your home.
Right.
So if you can tell a story and actually put it out in a visual spatial format, then people are more likely to both understand and remember what you have to say. And by the way, there's a very funny kind of insight here. Even the old Greeks, when they memorized their talks, in the very early stages of democracy, they would use something called method of Loki,
Yeah.
which is the word for place, because they would place out their talks in a room, and as they would stand up to talk on the podium, they would do essentially a mental walkthrough of that room.
Right.
Now, this can be used by presenters as well. So if you can map out your story and take people on a visual journey, then they are more likely to understand and remember what you have to say. And this is actually in many ways a part of what's inspired us at Prezi as well. So if you think about Prezi, it's kind of a spatial metaphor instead of a paginated metaphor.
Yeah.
So, slides are essentially like books in a page. But the Prezi zooming world is much more like a room that you step into, and then you kind of step back to look at the big picture, and you go in to see a certain part of the room. In very many ways, similar to what you'd expect, when you imagine your kitchen. You step in your kitchen, you see the
And you
big
start
picture,
to
but
look
then you
around.
step over to the desk and then you look there. So my point being that it's clearly so that certain types of information is more engaging than others for our brains, because we have, on an evolutionary basis, been developing to consume certain types of information more than others.
Right.
And what I think will be the future of presentations, but also the future of human-computer interaction, will be a very physical, a very responsive metaphor that will resemble always more the real world than it resembles a very artificial world of books, for example.
Okay.
And so you can almost think about this even in the way that web pages are built up. A hyperlink is essentially an ability to walk to a different part of a room. Whereas, if you're reading a book, you're essentially forced to go through this long sequence without the ability to change direction. And that's I think what these spatial metaphors affords us.
The challenge. Peter, one important thing to go with tips for entrepreneurs or business watching this video. Often, I think the problem when you do a presentation, whatever you pitch, I mean, if you pitch your startup, if you are doing a presentation to your boss with your new idea, whatever, what sort of presentation you're doing, is that you start from zero. And I give you an example. Sometimes I see presentations from very famous people, and they just go on the stage and say, "Hi." And people, whoa, that's amazing. That reaction is immediate. It's like if you go to a concert and there is a very famous Italian concert that always start a concert by saying, "Oh," and people, whoa, crazy. They go crazy for just, if I do it, people throw at me objects. So the problem is with business is that often you have to inspire your partner, your boss, your client, whatever, but you talk with people who really don't want to listen to you. You have no that authority. So it's very difficult because you start from zero. You don't have a
Yeah.
clock.
Or below zero.
Yeah, or below zero. So, in your experience, what are your suggestions? How can you deliver a great presentation even when you start in such a difficult
Yeah.
situation or
Yeah.
condition?
Yeah. So in these situations, people are kind of wanting to find the silver bullet solution. But the truth is, there is no silver bullet
Right.
solution. Every situation is unique. And if there's one thing that I would recommend is to really try to understand the situation that you're going to end up before you start thinking about, how am I going to deliver my idea?
Right.
So understanding your audience, understanding what frame of mind they are in, why are they even coming to the meeting? What are they hoping to leave after the meeting with? Understanding all of those parts is kind of essential even before you start thinking about, okay, what should I talk about? And then, of course, you always have your own agenda. You might want to, explain to them why internet is important, as in your case, or whatever.
Right.
But if you can't understand why the people are coming to listen to you, then there's a very high risk that you start talking about things that are not relevant or interesting from them.
Right.
So I think framing things in a way that actually generates value for the audience is the way that you generate enthusiasm and interest, because then people feel like you're not doing this to serve yourself, but you're doing that to actually
To add value to them.
help them, and that's true.
Yeah. Right.
Like if you take the effort to really understand them and why you're doing this, then you can actually provide inspiration and insight and knowledge to people.
Yeah. And often you have to adapt, and you discover based on the audience that when you meet them, then you discover it. Like sometimes I think it's like with kids. You decide the name before, but you should give the name of your baby when you see him or when you see her, because only when you see him you think, oh gosh, this name, it doesn't really work. So probably it's something similar with presentation.
And there's research on what you say as well, actually. So a lot of people, if they are skeptical to your idea, actually it helps a lot to be very responsive to their concerns. So one of the worst things that you can do, if people are kind of, not really interested or open-minded about what you're about to say, then you need to kind of include their opinions and their thoughts somehow.
Yeah.
A lot of people say that some of the best salespeople are not the salespeople who know how to talk for 15 minutes in a beautifully engaging way, but that is equally capable of listening.
Right.
And actively listening, not just, pretending to listen, but really think about, okay, what does this mean? And I can put myself in your shoes, and, how can then I be of help?
Yeah. Right.
Given the situation.
I like this point, Peter. I think it's very, very important. Include the doubts, the criticism that audience already have, and you have to talk about it and find the right way to go to your point in the end. Very important. Do you have any case history that you think, wow, they really did an amazing job using Prezi or doing a presentation that you think could be a good role model for people willing to do a great presentation in business?
Yeah, I think that, so for recently, just last week, this company, Arvai, launched their product. This is a quite cool company. They do an iPhone-based instrument, and they build, they put your iPhone in essentially in a wooden structure, and then it turns into an instrument. So you use the iPhone to kind of hit the keys, but then you have extra keys also on this wooden structure. It's very cool. So what's interesting about them is in many ways they use Prezi in how we see with many of our users, which is they use Prezi really not just to present ideas with, but also to develop the ideas with. So I mentioned to you that, you know, we have some things in common with whiteboards and some things in common with slides. And what we see in the example of Artiphone is they created 3 rapid prototyping with Prezi, and then essentially designed the product using Prezi. They were distributed in various cities across the US, and then they kind of had this large canvas where they were putting all of their ideas to see how they match up, and discovered new connections that they didn't know existed. So they were developing their story by working together and not just, you know, taking a story, making it beautiful, and then selling it.
Right.
And in fact, what we see a lot is this kind of, if I would say the old-fashioned way of thinking around presentation is probably, okay, I'm going to do a great presentation and I'm going to do it 100 times or whatever it takes to get the investment or convince the audience or whatever. And what we see right now, I think, is that ideas develop constantly. So how can you facilitate, you know, the evolution of an idea rather than making one perfect idea and then just doing that 100 times?
Yeah, right.
And if you can cut down the kind of the cycle time between thinking and doing, then you get actually a competitive advantage. This goes back to actually the reasoning around the idea economy, because in a world where we have 2.5 billion people connected to the internet, you've never been able to have such a huge audience available to you with a click of a button, right? But to stay original in this world requires you to think creatively and develop your ideas fast all the time, because there's probably a few 100,000 other people who are thinking about similar things right now.
Yeah.
So how can you kind of keep evolving your idea constantly while you tell beautiful and inspiring stories? That I think is
the challenge.
That's the challenge for a lot of people, and not just entrepreneurs, by the way, even the biggest companies as well.
Yeah.
Let me name a very interesting fact on that. So in the time that my parents have been around, the average lifespan of the most successful companies here on the US market, the top 500 companies, have gone from 61 years to 18 years.
Wow.
A drastic reduction in kind of their lifespan. And I think this is a great way of illustrating of just how quickly the market is developing and how the need for speed and creativity is becoming the central part of any business.
Yeah.
In fact, I'll tell you one more data point, because I did some research on this, and it's quite interesting. IBM asked 1,500 CEOs what were the most crucial competency of their companies to be able to survive in the future, and 60% of them said creativity.
All right.
So presenting, you know, in many ways is going to be, yes, more conversational, as you suggest, but also much quicker evolving. And the demands on you coming up with something creative is going to be higher and higher.
Yeah.
I'm convinced of that. So creative thinking is going to be really something that will help you to stand out, and it will help you to win a multi-billion market potentially. But the competition will be much tougher than ever before.
Yeah. Peter, we just have to close the interview, but I want to have your 3 favorite tools, mobile apps, or 2-3 websites that you use for business to be more productive, more creative. If you have any top 3, it would be much appreciated to share it with the viewers here.
Yeah, sure. So I use, of course, my email.
Okay, that's
on my phone. That's my top one to go to. and my calendar.
Okay.
So these are pretty like
Straightforward. And it's
work-oriented.
like a
But then,
Gmail, Google.
yeah, I use Google Calendar on my phone. I have a lot of trouble with it, though, I have to admit. Um, and then to, inspire me to think creatively, I like Spotify.
Okay, that's interesting. So music, listening music around, and stay in touch with Sweden, at least in your heart.
Yes.
All right. Peter Arvai, thank you so much. Peter Arvai, co-founder and CEO of Prezi, Prezi.com. Guys, have a look if you never use Prezi. It's time to start using it. Good luck for everything, Peter. Thank you so much for your chatting. Thanks.
Thanks, Marco.